JBB's Final Thoughts, Episode 35. What have these eyes seen in the past 61 years? Joe Estius here. Recently had my 61st birthday, and I'm totally immersed in the current Apollo NASA nostalgia. One thing that I've seen in several of the different documentaries and movies was a comment made by Neil Armstrong that it had only been 60 years since the Wright brothers had done their first powered flight at Kitty Hawk to the actual Apollo program, and that kind of inspired me to create my own list of things that I've experienced or witnessed in my 61 years. And here's the list. Can you see it? There it is. So I'm going to kind of go through these, and so let's start with space. I do remember as a young kid watching the early NASA flights on TV, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and to this day I really have a thing for the Gemini spacecraft. It's that two-seater that's really kind of cool, where several of the astronauts had missions that lasted 14 days, where they're literally sitting kind of like in the front seat of a sports car for 14 straight days. You get to know each other pretty well that way. So some of the missions were launched and done in the same day, so you could spend the day just watching these launches, and that's what I did back in the day. Also, I did remember watching the launch and landing of the first space shuttle, Columbia, in the early 80s on TV. Living on the West Coast, most of this stuff was done via TV, which is kind of funny because I do remember the folks putting the television in their bedroom, and so if there was a launch or there was something that we wanted to watch, then, so much for their sleep. Not very smart. Needless to say, I do have two younger brothers and sisters, so we weren't that disruptive apparently. I also remember watching the destruction of the Space Shuttle Challenger on TV in 1986 and Columbia in 2003. And then when I moved to Florida in 2008, I did watch the last of the Space Shuttle missions from STS-126 in 2008 to STS-135 in 2011. And I remember working with a lot of folks that had been, living their lives there in Florida, and having to pull them out to go watch some of these launches live, because many of them kind of just didn't think about it. Another milestone I do remember in relation to music was the Beatles. I remember seeing the Beatles in Ed Sullivan. That was 1964. Interesting thing is I don't remember them having multiple appearances, but when I did get a DVD documentary about that particular thing, I come to find out that they did play 3 times. The first time that everybody remembers, and then the following week, and then the third week they traveled with the Ed Sullivan Show down to Miami Beach, Florida, and did a show there, or did some songs there. Then getting all caught up in Beatlemania, I do remember my siblings and I performing some Beatle tunes for the aunts and uncles at my grandmother's house in San Gabriel some Sunday when we were there visiting. I remember late night TV shows, pre-MTV, Don Kirshner's Rock Show and the Midnight Special Show, watching those in the 70s and 80s. And then I do remember staying up late watching MTV on a friend's cable because I was staying at his place the night before I got married. So as far as religion, raised a conservative Catholic, grew up in the 60s around the time of Vatican II. My dad was raised Protestant, but because of the agreement between my mom and dad, he remained mostly silent, and for the sake of the family, put his faith kind of on the back burner. So in some ways, I remember having early memories of, it was my sisters and I and my mom and my aunts. We all went to church, and the dads seemed to stay at home. So grew up in the 70s in Southern California, and thus I experienced the hippie or the Jesus movement. A little bit later on in the 70s, got involved with the Catholic Charismatic movement in Southern California. Then as we roll into the 70s and 80s, got involved with the contemporary Christian movement, where I myself participated as a musician, as a singer, songwriter. I do have one claim to fame, was I did perform as an opening act for the Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa Saturday Night Live concerts, which were simulcast on the local radio stations. Sometime that was around 1982. Then in the late 80s, after my divorce, kind of slipped into a period of agnosticism. I kind of figured that my faith hadn't quite delivered. Something was messed up in the equation, and so I decided to go it alone. And then in the, I want to say, my troublesome 2000s, I kind of re-explored my faith. And then when I moved to Florida in 2008, kind of walked back out because, again, many questions and not as many answers as I had come to expect. Technology. I learned to type in 1972 on a manual typewriter in the 7th grade during a summer school class. And so that would help create a little finger strength, which was good for guitar and for giving shoulder and neck rubs many, many years later. 1970s, I was involved in creating 8mm silent movies or silent films. Well, they weren't, in that day, the film didn't have the audio track, which we would have later on. In the 80s, when I converted to doing analog video creation in the 80s and 90s, and then obviously switched, not so obviously, but I switched to digital video creation on early Macs and iMacs from the 1990s until now, until this video right here. Let's see. So I was using technology when I first started teaching in the mid-90s to create curriculum materials such as booklets, posters, and quizzes. And then eventually I began to literally teach university coursework in the 2000s, all online. Next category is family, and what stands out for me is the birth of my granddaughter Elena in 2005. Next thing that kind of stands out for me is my dad, who seemed to be in amazingly great health into his mid-70s. I remember watching his quick decline and death in his early 80s due to respiratory issues. My older sister, Kathy, who I always thought of as a force of nature, saw her rapid decline. In part, she was suffering for several years from untreated symptoms that were similar to my own case of CIDP, CIDP, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. So that took her down. The next thing that kind of stands out in my mind is all the things that were left undone by the passing of several of my talented family members and friends, and that inspired me to try to refocus my energies on things that I continue to say that I want to do, and I'm trying to find a more realistic way to do these things given how short our lives really are. So that's my list. Most of us are so busy dealing with the unending demands of life from day to day and moment to moment that it's difficult to have any sense of accomplishment or even peace about how we've lived our lives. I'm certain that family and friends who are no longer here were just going through their motions right up to the last moments with no thought beyond that particular moment. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that given the truckload of opportunities that I see that I've been lucky enough to have, I would want this life to mean more than skidding sideways to my final destination and lamenting, well, that didn't go as planned. I don't know about you, but I'm well aware that I'm pretty damn lucky to be here in this point of human history, living in this very flawed country with incredible possibilities springing forth on a daily or moment-to-moment basis. For that reason and the others listed above, I'm still looking for and engaged in my life's mission beyond Margaritaville and this thing they call retirement. That said, I'm not anticipating chasing disruptive 5-year-olds or explaining myself to arrogant preteens who believe that they're all that for the rest of my life. I think I've earned some respite from that. What about you? What escape plans are you hatching for yourself and your loved ones? What wonders have you seen over your many years that you haven't thought about lately because you're just too damn busy to be bothered? Speaking of bothered, if you haven't done so, please subscribe to either my blog or to my YouTube channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, click to the link to my blog, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click the follow button. Enter your email address, and whenever I post a new podcast, you'll get a message in your email. Because I recently moved my videos to a new YouTube account, I have very few subscribers. So feel free to go to my channel, click on the subscribe button and the little bell icon so that you get an email whenever I post a new video podcast to my channel. Alas, thanks to Facebook's precious algorithm, it's not enough to be my friend on Facebook if you're interested in getting these podcasts, because they get lost in the shuffle or you just don't see them. It works much better if you either subscribe to my blog or to my YouTube channel, or both. Also, please feel free to comment on my YouTube channel or on my blog so that I know that you're there. Enjoy! Please teach me how to speak English. Also, please feel free.